Robert Gould Shaw, from Hero Tales from American History. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Leeson. Hero Tales from American History by Henry Cabot Lodge and Theodore Roosevelt. Robert Gould Shaw, written by Henry Cabot Lodge. Brave, good, and true, I see him stand before me now, and read again on that young brow, where every hope was new, how sweet were life! Yet, by the mouth firm set, and look made up for duty's utmost debt, I could divine he knew that death within the sulphurous hostile lines, in the mere wreck of nobly pitched designs, plucks heart's ease, and not rue. Right in the van, on the red rampart's slippery swell, with heart that beat a charge, he fell, forward, as fits a man. But the high soul burns on to light men's feet where death for noble ends makes dying sweet. His life her crescents span, orbs full with share in their undarkening days, whoever climbed the battailous steeps of praise since valor's praise began. We bide our chance, unhappy, and make terms with fate, a little more to let us wait. He leads for aye the advance. Hopes forlorn hopes that plant the desperate good for nobler earths and days of manlier mood. Our wall of circumstance cleared at a bound, he flashes o'er the fight, a saintly shape of fame, to cheer the right and steel each wavering glance. I write of one, while with dim eyes I think of three. Who weeps not others fair and brave as he? Ah, when the fight is won, dear land, whom triflers now make bold to scorn, thee from whose forehead earth awaits her morn, how nobler shall the sun flame in thy sky, how braver breathe thy air, that thou bredst children who for thee could dare and die as thine have done. Lowell. Robert Gould Shaw was born in Boston on October 10, 1837, the son of Francis and Sarah Sturgis Shaw. When he was about 9 years old, his parents moved to Staten Island, and he was educated there and at school in the neighborhood of New York until he went to Europe in 1853, where he remained traveling and studying for the next 3 years. He entered Harvard College in 1856, and left at the end of his 3rd year in order to accept an advantageous business offer in New York. Even as a boy he took much interest in politics, and especially in the question of slavery. He voted for Lincoln in 1860, and at that time enlisted as a private in the New York 7th Regiment, feeling that there was likelihood of trouble, and that there would be a demand for soldiers to defend the country. His foresight was justified only too soon, and on April 19, 1861, he marched with his regiment to Washington. The call for the 7th Regiment was only for 30 days, and at the expiration of that service he applied for and obtained a commission as second lieutenant in the 2nd Massachusetts, and left with that regiment for Virginia in July, 1861. He threw himself eagerly into his new duties, and soon gained a good position in the regiment. At Cedar Mountain he was an aide on General Gordon's staff, and was greatly exposed in the performance of his duties during the action. He was also with his regiment at Antietam, and was in the midst of the heavy fighting of that great battle. Early in 1863, the government determined to form Negro regiments, and Governor Andrew offered Shaw, who had now risen to the rank of captain, the colonelcy of one to be raised in Massachusetts, the first black regiment recruited under state authority. It was a great compliment to receive this offer, but Shaw hesitated as to his capacity for such a responsible post. He first wrote a letter declining, on the ground that he did not feel that he had ability enough for the undertaking, and then changed his mind, and telegraphed Governor Andrew that he would accept. It is not easy to realize it now, but his action then in accepting this command required high moral courage, of a kind quite different from that which he had displayed already on the field of battle. The prejudice against the blacks was still strong even in the North. There was a great deal of feeling among certain classes against enlisting black regiments at all, and the officers who undertook to recruit and lead negroes were exposed to much attack and criticism. Shaw felt, however, that this very opposition made it all the more incumbent on him to undertake the duty. He wrote on February 8, "After I have undertaken this work, I shall feel that what I have to do is to prove that the Negro can be made a good soldier. I am inclined to think that the undertaking will not meet with so much opposition as was at first supposed. All sensible men in the army, of all parties, after a little thought, say that it is the best thing that can be done, and surely those at home who are not brave or patriotic enough to enlist should not ridicule or throw obstacles in the way of men who are going to fight for them. There is a great prejudice against it, but now that it has become a government matter, that will probably wear away. At any rate I shan't be frightened out of it by its unpopularity. I feel convinced that I shall never regret having taken this step, as far as I myself am concerned, for while I was undecided, I felt ashamed of myself as if I were cowardly." Colonel Shaw went at once to Boston, after accepting his new duty, and began the work of raising and drilling the 54th Regiment. He met with great success, for he and his officers laboured heart and soul, and the regiment repaid their efforts. On March 30 he wrote, "The mustering officer who was here today is a Virginian, and has always thought it was a great joke to try to make soldiers of niggers, but he tells me now that he has never mustered in so fine a set of men, though about 20,000 had passed through his hands since September." On May 28 Colonel Shaw left Boston, and his march through the city was a triumph. The appearance of his regiment made a profound impression, and was one of the events of the war which those who saw it never forgot. The regiment was ordered to South Carolina, and when they were off Cape Hatteras, Colonel Shaw wrote, "The more I think of the passage of the 54th through Boston, the more wonderful it seems to me. Just remember our own doubts and fears, and other people's sneering and pitying remarks when we began last winter, and then look at the perfect triumph of last Thursday. We have gone quietly along, forming the 1st Regiment, and at last left Boston amidst greater enthusiasm than has been seen since the first 3 months' troops left for the war. Truly, I ought to be thankful for all my happiness and my success in life so far, and if the raising of colored troops proves such a benefit to the country, and to the blacks as many people think it will, I shall thank God 1,000 times that I was led to take my share in it." He had, indeed, taken his share in striking one of the most fatal blows to the barbarism of slavery which had yet been struck. The formation of the black regiments did more for the emancipation of the Negro and the recognition of his rights than almost anything else. It was impossible, after that, to say that men who fought and gave their lives for the Union and for their own freedom were not entitled to be free. The acceptance of the command of a black regiment by such men as Shaw and his fellow officers was the great act which made all this possible. After reaching South Carolina, Colonel Shaw was with his regiment at Port Royal and on the islands of that coast for rather more than a month, and on July 18 he was offered the post of honour in an assault upon Fort Wagner, which was ordered for that night. He had proved that the negroes could be made into a good regiment, and now the second great opportunity had come, to prove their fighting quality. He wanted to demonstrate that his men could fight side by side with white soldiers, and show to somebody beside their officers what stuff they were made of. He therefore accepted the dangerous duty with gladness. Late in the day the troops were marched across Folly and Morris Islands and formed in line of battle within 600 yards of Fort Wagner. At 7:30 the order for the charge was given, and the regiment advanced. When they were within 100 yards of the fort, the rebel fire opened with such effect that the 1st Battalion hesitated and wavered. Colonel Shaw sprang to the front and waving his sword shouted, "Forward, 54th!" With another cheer the men rushed through the ditch, and gained a parapet on the right. Colonel Shaw was one of the first to scale the walls. As he stood erect, a noble figure, ordering his men forward and shouting them to press on, he was shot dead and fell into the fort. After his fall the assault was repulsed. General